Welcome to the Afghanistan Project podcast. I'm your host, Beth Bailey, and my guest today is Brent Huffman, a documentary filmmaker and professor at Northwestern University, where he's the director of documentary journalism. Brent is the director, producer, cinematographer, and editor of the 2014 documentary Saving Mes Aynak, which won over 30 awards and has been broadcast in over 50 countries. Saving Mes Aynak is also featured in the 2024 Archeologists Film Festival with an updated ending to reflect the current effort, or ongoing effort, to save the ancient Buddhist city, which still faces destruction due to Chinese copper mining efforts in the area. Brent, it's really fabulous to have you here. I've been watching what you're doing to raise awareness of what's going on in Mes Aynak for some time, so thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you.
So I've watched your documentary, as I was telling you before we started filming, and it's incredible. I think because more than anything, no one knows if this city is going to remain, and what you've done, you've shown it beautifully, and you capture these really incredible pieces of art that date back to, 5,000 years?
Over 5,000, yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's well done, so that even if those things don't make it to, and it's only 10% excavated at the point that you were there. So, yeah, in a city that is the size of Pompeii, massive, you've shown some of these items and given them life that could very well be taken away. So much that you capture the war in it so well too. There's a moment where one of the archaeologists' brothers is killed in a Taliban bombing. And, there's the ongoing threat of Taliban attacks on that area because the Taliban have been known to attack historical, cultural sites. They don't want to admit that there is a culture beyond the one that they want to impose on Afghanistan. These beautiful, it's, as you say in the documentary, it's part of the Silk Road. So you have the influence of all over the region in Afghanistan, and it's very important. So what I'd love to do is just ask you, how did you learn about Mes Aynak? Where did this project get started?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if we have to go sort of back in time, I think it was 2008 or 2009. There was actually a New York Times story that was exclusively focused on the mining. So it was something like this is this crazy story, really, that this Chinese government-owned company was going to set up in Taliban country in Afghanistan to open pit copper mine, what's probably $100 billion worth of copper, this enormous copper reserve. But the story was that that they would actually have their Chinese staff working in this Taliban controlled area. And then kind of as a like almost a footnote to the story, there was this mention of there's some kind of archaeological remains that would be completely destroyed when mining started. So it was almost like this little mention of something, almost like it wasn't important, honestly. And I think initially when I started this project, I was seeing what I could do and what I could actually cover. But once I sort of learned that Mes Aynak wasn't just this footnote, but was this, 500,000 square meter massive ancient Buddhist city with, other older material, beneath it, this incredible site. I really wanted to make this documentary to show, again, it's not this little footnote, but it's this World Heritage Site that's facing, complete erasure. And then I think the other big focus of the documentary is to show the incredible heroic work of Afghan archaeologists to risk their life to try to save this incredible site. So it started way back in 2009, and as we're talking about today, it's the story continues.
Yeah, it's really incredible because I've been covering it as after the fall. Everyone wondered, when is this Chinese company just going to decimate Mes Aynak and get rid of all of this culture and all of these things that we can learn so much about the past from this area. And I didn't know until I watched your documentary that there's much more to it than that. There's also the water table issue
Yeah.
where 174 villages would be destroyed or not. I think that they just wouldn't be able to get water, which is destruction in another way. And six were actually going to be decimated entirely to build the apparatus to support the
Yes.
mine. So, I mean, this is a far reaching implication to get this copper out of the ground. And as you said, I want to mention too the heroic efforts of these archaeologists. They were going without pay when they were working so hard with no money, which is,
Right.
I think, a standard thing in our 20 years. There's money, there's theoretical money, but people aren't necessarily getting it. And then you had ghost soldiers who were, making money off of. You detail a lot of these ongoing issues, the corruption that the major heads of the mining industry are getting so much money, but these guys doing the hard work on the ground and actually preserving history aren't getting paid. I mean, how frustrating was that to you to
Yeah,
see?
no, and that's a great point. So, like I said, the passion and this heroic effort of these Afghan archaeologists who are like getting like text messages, in the film from the Taliban, saying if you keep you keep doing this, we're gonna kill you. And they have families, they have young children. I mean, imagine working under that kind of stress in any job, let alone one like you say where they weren't getting paid. So there's a big fight in the documentary where the main subject kind of confronts the French delegation that's working there, and it's like, we haven't been paid for months. The other issue is they didn't have equipment, they didn't have digital cameras, they didn't have computers, and that's one thing that the documentary was able to fundraise and buy them computers, finally buy them cameras. I think part of that was I think they didn't want them to have any way to document, and I think there was sort of this, and I sort of saw it play out. If something went wrong, they would blame the Afghan archaeologists, right? They would say, "Oh, they did it," and the Afghan archaeologists wouldn't have any way to sort of document anything or say otherwise. The other thing which I think is great, what you talked about, is all these different people are getting rich from Mes Aynak, except the Afghan people. And there's this, sometimes when this story is told, it's like, oh, this is going to be this big win for Afghanistan. Finally it's the biggest. I think it's still the largest investment ever in Afghanistan in any way. But as you say, and as you see in the film, and as from my work in Afghanistan, it really is everyone else will benefit other than the Afghan people, right? The money is not going to the Afghan people, and like you say, there's a major water aquifer that will be polluted probably forever, right? Villages are being destroyed. Afghanistan's lost so much in kind of constant war. Their history will be erased. Imagine you don't have a history. You're a people without a history. So, and I think the aquifer is just the tip of the environmental, iceberg of what mining will do to the area. So that's a big part of the story too. That I think Afghanistan and the Afghan people have everything to lose, and it's really, and now that the nightmare scenario that has sort of happened. The Taliban have taken over. They now own Mes Aynak. So now it's really the Taliban and the Chinese government that will make all the money, and Afghanistan will be the loser in so many ways here, I
Yeah.
believe.
Oh, and as you say, it's like I see it because the Chinese have invested heavily in Afghanistan outside of this mine. I mean, they've got oil fields that are producing lots of oil right now, and all these other things going on, and yet the people are still starving. The people are still preparing for another hard winter. Where is that money going? It's not helping the Afghan people, and so
Yeah.
that's a very important thing to watch. And I mean, how much money is the U.S. sending to the Taliban or
Right.
to Afghanistan? There are lots of ways that we couch that, but if the money is going and it's being taken into Taliban coffers through taxes and what have you, is it going back to the people? Not that I've seen. I'm seeing suffering continue, and that is the part of the story that is so hard to know that
Yeah.
when do the Afghan people get to benefit? When do they get
Yeah.
to
And
retain that?
totally. And you're 100% right that I think the, millions of dollars that the U.S. is sending to the Taliban now for God knows what reason, honestly, I think it is going to their, pockets. And honestly, it's just going straight outside the country. And I do feel, again, my opinion, but I felt the U.S. government really abandoned Afghanistan and abandoned its friend and its partner, and just created this horrific situation for everyone.
What's the most amazing thing you saw while you were at the site?
Yeah, boy, that's a great question. And there were so many things that like the Afghan archaeologists would be like, come to this sort of dark space and look at this thing, and part of me sort of couldn't believe it was a real. And they're sort of nonchalantly like, look at this thing we discovered. But I think the two things come to mind right away. One is the manuscripts. So much writing, and really it's some of the oldest writing ever discovered. Any kind of writing, some of the oldest oil painting ever discovered in the world. But there would be sort of these big sort of rolls of sort of mud covered manuscripts that they would show me that were incredible. One of the other most sort of incredible things that I saw at Mes Aynak was it actually appears in the film, but there is this Buddhist stupa that's discovered, basically a little area, and there is the skeletal remains of a woman sort of right in front of the stupa, and not surprisingly, the woman is the skeleton. So the skeleton remains are kind of completely green from the copper that's in the ground. And to me, there's this sort of 2,000-year-old stupa that's unearthed that's incredible. But then to sort of have some glimpse at the people that occupied Mes Aynak, during this time, I think was also just amazing. But like I said, the Mes Aynak was full of just incredible discoveries, and people that were working there were like, for archaeological digs, this kind of thing never happens, where we're constantly kind of pulling, writing and paintings and pottery and jewelry and, human remains. We're constantly sort of pulling material out of the ground. That's very unusual. Archaeological digs are usually sort of very kind of boring, things where they're going sort of centimeter by centimeter. So that was, extraordinarily exciting to sort of witness all of that history being discovered.
It is incredible, and I was surprised to see the green in the skeleton you mentioned, and just how, yeah, everything all at once, all these people, and did they have any idea what happened there? That this woman was just laying by that artifact. Did something occur, or do they just not know?
Yeah, so that was one of the big, the big issues. One is that the archaeological work, that was being done was, referred to as rescue archaeology. So it was not the normal archaeology. Rescue archaeology in some ways is the most destructive because you're rushing and finding things and trying to protect them or move them if you can. And so honestly, so little was known about what was being unearthed. And I think my fear now is, that I'm not sure that study will ever happen with some of this material. But yeah, it was sort of like, yeah, here's this really mysterious thing. Why is this skeletal remains next to this stupa? Kind of what was going on. They do know that the Buddhists were actually mining for copper as well. So the monks at Mes Aynak in a very smaller form were also utilizing the copper. So that could be it, but it would be sort of just speculation about what was happening.
Sure. Yeah, it is interesting to watch, and you have that one moment where the Western woman is trying to explain how you know, the dig happened, where I think something got hit, and it's everybody's trying to find out what happened, and she seems to be kind of in the wrong there, but doesn't want to take what happened in that moment.
Yeah, so they were again very unusual rushed archaeology. They were using like a big excavator digger. I mean, it was like, it was hard to watch because you can imagine whatever's down there. This big metal arm is sort of scraping through it. Yeah, so it was really complicated. There was so in the film there are actually Ministry of Mine hired archaeologists on one part of the site, and then there are the Afghan archaeologists that are Ministry of Culture. So you sort of have culture and mining archaeologists actually sort of fighting in one moment. One group is saying, it's fine to use these excavators, kind of in the sense like we sort of don't care. It's the fastest way, right? And then you have the Afghan archaeologists like, this is not how you do archaeology. This you're going to destroy the site. And thankfully they got her to sort of stop that. Um,
Wow.
but yeah, there was this weird, weird conflict on every level at the site, and now of course that the Taliban have taken over, I actually don't know if there are any archaeologists associated with protecting or digging anymore. So all of that has stopped since 3 years ago.
And that's my next question for you is, when you produced this, it was a very much like, mining could start at any moment. And then there was this stay of execution over and over and over for 10 years. So what is the state of that mining project now in 2024?
Yeah, so that I think that's the big question, and it's a great one. And I think there's really really bad news, and there are some sort of glimmers of hope. There actually are some good news, and some of it is kind of brand new that I'm hearing. And I guess I should start with the bad news. So one thing on the stay of execution that you mentioned, that was something that obviously the Saving Mes Aynak documentary and whole kind of outreach campaign was really pushing for. That give the archaeologists more time, let them discover things. At the very least, let's protect what's there. Let's move it out of the site. I think the ultimate goal was always, at least for me, was to stop mining altogether, honestly, and protect Mes Aynak like a Pompeii or a Machu Picchu that was, a tourist destination. That sounds crazy now, but a tourist destination where people could come, like at Bamiyan actually is where the Taliban blew up the giant Buddhas. That is actually a tourist site, or was a tourist site before the Taliban took over. So there was a little bit of a precedent. But the nightmare scenario played out. The Taliban took over Afghanistan. Like I said, the United States, I think, really betrayed the Afghan people, and it was just a big surprise. Like no one knew this was coming. All of a sudden, Afghanistan lost its support. Kabul fell. Mes Aynak, was taken over by the Taliban. And again, nightmare scenario for me, in terms of like the way things could play out. And honestly, the Taliban taking over was not. I did not expect it to happen. I a little bit didn't see it coming. Okay, so 3 years ago, so obviously the Taliban wants mining to happen. Beijing has actually been wooing the Taliban actually as far back as 2005. So has been flying Taliban officials to Beijing. So this friendly relationship has been a long time coming, and I do think China probably knew this was coming and anticipated the Taliban take over, the Taliban taking over. So I think the Taliban and the Chinese government have been talking about many different projects, but certainly about Mes Aynak, and the Taliban being, I think, pretty cash strapped, honestly, and desperate for money, has been sort of playing nice. We kind of see it not in terms of like the women's rights or human rights or journalist rights or academia, like the and I think the big fear of the Taliban is the things they promise don't come to fruition, and the old Taliban, executing people in public, and now women cannot be seen in public in any way, or cannot speak and cannot go to school, and all of these promises actually that they made, that they have changed, sort of didn't play out. But at least now the Taliban is pretending, maybe, or playing nice, that they want this mining project to happen with China. In a really surprising way, the Taliban has been saying that they do not want to destroy Mes Aynak now, and that's obviously good news. But I don't trust anything the the Taliban says, that I never will. But they are actually now saying that the destruction of Mes Aynak is not something that they want to see. They want mining to begin. Back in August, there was a big news story about Mes Aynak that the initial stages of mining actually started. So this long, decade-long process is finally over. Infrastructure and roads are starting to be built and created around Mes Aynak. I freaked out when I heard the news, and I thought, that this is the day we've all been dreading, where Mes Aynak was going to be, blown up in an open pit copper mine. But again, I don't believe what the Taliban says, but the glimmer of hope now is that the Taliban is talking about mining in a different way, actually. Instead of open pit mining, to try to mine underneath the Buddhist city. Now, honestly, that will still likely destroy things. Imagine, someone proposing we're going to mine at Machu Picchu. I mean, everyone would freak out because, there's vibrations, and there's chemicals, and there's still explosions, and all this destructive stuff you don't want next to priceless world heritage. But again, I think there's a glimmer of hope that the Taliban now is saying, they're actually saying we want to preserve Mes Aynak, we want to preserve this history. There was actually a story in the art newspaper recently that said they want a tourist site. They want Mes Aynak to be a tourist destination, and that's the first time I've ever heard any, Taliban person, say anything like that. So, some really, really bad news. Mining has started. But this, again, this glimmer of hope that maybe at least some of Mes Aynak will make it, make it out of this, undamaged. A glimmer. This small hope.
Right, small. But there's nothing that they seem to love more than to give you that glimmer and then just pull it away from you real fast. Women are going to go to school and right. They're going to have rights within Islam, which we all knew what that meant anyway. But they say one thing, they do another. It's like you said, I don't trust them. I don't trust the thing they say, and so it's very concerning. And the other question is, what about the archaeologists who were doing this work? They worked for the former Afghan government. They already were on the Taliban's radar. So what do you know of their situation right now?
Yeah, and I think this is under the same umbrella that the Taliban can't be trusted, and the old Taliban that we knew, the terrorist organization that was essentially killing Afghans, killing Hazara people, killing and oppressing women, destroying journalism. That's the same. It's the exact same Taliban that we had in the past, and I think they've proved that. And so you have Afghan archaeologists, and I won't name them just to protect them, but Afghan archaeologists that have either fled the country because the Taliban, essentially said, like, you worked in some way with the U.S. government, so we're gonna, essentially we're gonna kill you for that, right? Even though that's not really what the Afghan archaeologists were doing. There was sort of U.S. money involved. There was U.S. funding behind it. So you have that, like, we're going to get you for that. Then you have Afghans that are, a part of a religious minority group that are persecuted. We're going to get you for that too, right? So there's sort of multiple things. And then obviously you see that, the current, I would argue the current Afghanistan under the Taliban is just this hellscape for women, for children, for everyone. So the Afghan archaeologists are fleeing all these, this perfect storm of just terrible things, from persecution to, just not wanting their kids to stay in this, in this awful place. And part of that, the U.S. kind of abandoning Afghanistan, they've made it really difficult to use the United States as a partner to get a visa to leave the country. So it was kind of like, U.S. abandoned the country and then abandoned all of these people that they put in harm's way because they worked together. So behind the scenes, and it's extraordinarily difficult, but I've been trying to help the Afghan archaeologists leave Afghanistan. And they've all been removed from the site, so everyone in the film no longer works at Mes Aynak. So not only are they in this life-threatening situation, but they're kind of watching, their life's work essentially, being, tampered with and taken over. So, again, that's when I say there's a lot of bad news. That's part of that bad news. But the hopeful part is a lot of them have left, and I think, some of them will be leaving soon. So
That is a good thing. I mean, and I won't ask you what programs they're leaving on, because that does then give some indication of the Taliban, if they want to watch, of where to look for them. And how sad that is, that these are people who are trying to preserve Afghanistan, for whom that really mattered so deeply. And the Taliban just don't have any compassion for any of that. So what are you thinking? I mean, what do you think is going? Do you think it's just gonna be? I think we've already touched on what will happen if they do the underground mining. Obviously, open pit would just exploded, and I guess we just have to wait and see what happens and hope for the best.
Yeah, I mean, right. I hate to sort of be that passive about it, and like I said, I'm I've been trying to help these Afghan archaeologists. That's sort of almost been a bigger priority than anything else. Yeah, I mean, I still am trying to spread awareness, get people to still, and thank you for talking about it today, getting people to still care about it and think about it. I think the other thing that's happened is when the U.S. pulled out of Afghanistan, U.S. media also kind of lost interest in Afghanistan in a way, right? I think there's very little reporting on Afghanistan now. That I think I don't know if they think there's, the military is not there, so Americans don't have a reason to care about it or something. But I've been trying to, keep this conversation, keep the conversation going. I do think that that the Taliban are receptive to this. Actually, I do think hearing that, people care about Mes Aynak, and it's more valuable when it exists than when it's destroyed, right? If you think back to that little footnote in the New York Times story of there's this ancient site maybe, and maybe who cares about it? You'd like to go from that to no, there's this. It's World Heritage, and people would be devastated to hear it's destroyed in one hand, and would pay money to see the sites and learn more about it. So I do think, honestly, the Taliban have been receptive to that, and have heard that message that maybe in a selfish way there's more money to be gained by preserving it.
Sure.
So I do think, again, that the Taliban does not call me up and give me updates or communicate with me in any way, and that would be strange if that was that'd be disturbing if that was happening, I guess. But I do think just keeping showing that people care, I think is really important. And I do think, like, this very strange, now the Taliban is saying, let's mine a different way. Let's make Mes Aynak a tourist destination. While that all sounds kind of, naive, it's great to hear that thinking. And honestly, for me, so the Taliban in 2001 famously, blew up the two Bamiyan Buddhas, the towering statues, and it was this shocking horror, I think, for the world. For me, honestly, I never believed that they were destroying it because it offended them religiously or something. Like, I honestly think that's a total lie. I think, if the pyramids were in Afghanistan, they would blow up the pyramids, not because ancient Egyptian history, disturbs them or, bothers their religion or something. It was more to show, like, look what we can do, right? We're this powerful, we can blow up this thing that the world loves, right? And they wanted us to be shocked and horrified. They wanted the media attention, right? They wanted everyone to look at them and be like, ooh, they're so scary and powerful or whatever. And I think that's the same Taliban now, that I think they want this attention, and I think they're learning they can get this attention in this other way, right? The same kind of attention, and the same kind of media attention. So it's almost like we could use their vanity against them, in a sense. But other than that, yeah, there's not much else we can do.
Yeah, I find, just as a brief aside, it's so crazy to me when I have to reach out to the Taliban for comment on a media article, because I'm like, oh my God, these are the people that, like, before you're like, please God, don't ever let these people know that I exist, and now I have to seek a comment from you. Like, what is happening? This is a bizarro land. But there's one thing. So at the end of the documentary, you note that UNESCO never agreed to meet with you to be on the documentary. And, like, I would think that UNESCO might actually have, like, a role in being able to help preserve the site. I mean, are you trying to get their buy-in?
Yeah. So take a step back, I should say, I'm a filmmaker, professor. I'm not in the heritage world, or I wasn't before this. And not in the archaeology world either. Mm-hmm. And some of this was a big education for me too. Like, I maybe naively thought, everyone should care about this, right? Certainly, UNESCO and these big players that say, they're protecting world heritage from threat and stuff. But I think I think I was naive. The education that I received was just the politics that are at play at literally every step of this. UNESCO is a very complicated group. They actually have to be invited by the government to do anything. So this idea that UNESCO is protecting is sort of false. They're actually formally invited, and there's this whole sort of process. They rarely work in areas that are dangerous, honestly, like this too. So now certainly they could never be involved because of the Taliban. But back then, the Afghan government did not want to invite them, obviously, to be involved. UNESCO, there were smaller projects that they were involved in, actually, toward the very end of Mes Aynak, which I think were good and were helpful. But based on their own sort of rules, their hands were tied. Which I imagine they're mostly tied because if some culture is in threat of a government project, what government's going to invite them in to stop the project? It doesn't make
Yeah.
It makes no sense.
That's an interesting thing. It's, you wonder too, like, I've watched everything happening in Afghanistan and just wondered, like, we saw what happened last time when the Taliban did this to women, right? Like, who's going to step in and say no? And no one can. We don't even have, gender apartheid or any kind of gender persecution as a reason to intervene externally in a country's affairs right now. And so they're just getting off scot-free with this horrid behavior.
Totally.
And so my final question about this, and then I want to ask you about your new project that you're doing, is, when you wrapped up on this documentary, did you think that you were going to end up getting an education in how UNESCO works and how to get people, because it's almost like the preservation shifted from preserving this area to preserving the lives of the people who preserved it, right? Like,
Right.
did you think that this was going to be where you were 10 years later?
Yeah, no, and again, I didn't think it would be that it was a Taliban-run country now. I mean, it's also shocking in the way like people can accept things, right? That we can sort of accept, oh, the Taliban that was murdering thousands and thousands of people every year in Afghanistan is they're now they now own the country, and all of these projects that the United States put God knows how many millions into. Now the Taliban gets all of that money, and the Chinese government gets all that money. It's just like, what happened? I don't think if I went back in time and warned my past self about this, that maybe I would believe it, because it's crazy and strange. The other thing, I got an education about UNESCO. Certainly, the film has made so many enemies. Honestly, too, like there are so many groups that tried to stop the film. That was a big surprise to
Why?
me. Basically, because it doesn't fit into their kind of political agenda. And this is not Save Mes Aynak is not a film that plays into some political agenda. The State Department wouldn't talk to me, wouldn't let me interview people, wouldn't um, didn't actively try to stop me, but was as unhelpful as they you know could be. But then there were other heritage groups, surprisingly, that tried to attack me, attack the film, say that it's all a lie, that um, I would get that I'm a CIA operative that's trying to spread false information or
Wow.
something. All this, and that's something I never expected either. Like I kind of expected the opposite, that people would embrace this. Like um, it's like the polar bears are going extinct, right? You think everyone should care about this. That there aren't groups that are like, no, the polar bears should go extinct. That the don't say anything bad about the oil company or something. It was kind of like that. Like this surprising amount of people would became enemies to the film.
It's so crazy. But think of, what started as such a small thing for you became this amazing project that, that's what I love about, any kind of journalism, right? It matters to the journalists so much that they're willing to undergo all of that, the misunderstandings from the outside, the whatever, because there's this fire inside of them to go do that thing. And I'm glad that you did. I'm glad that I know about it, that, I watched it with my significant other, and he was like, "What? I didn't know about this." And now we're both just, that's the cool thing, is you get to put that fire into other people, and you certainly have. They might be, there might be detractors out there, but I think that the great thing is that people now know about this. And if something happens, as I said when we were chatting earlier, if something happens, you have documented those things. They exist from behind your lens, and you know at least in that way they will be preserved. And I just think that's not a small feat. So
Yeah, thank you. That means a lot. And I think also this effort by the Afghan archaeologists to work to
yeah.
save the site. I think the stereotype, I think, that's still very prevalent in the U.S. at least, is that you know Afghanistan is a country of terrorists, and they're, I don't know, again, it's the stereotype, like they're bad people or something. And you obviously, I hope, see in the film that you know the Afghan people are some of the warmest, most incredible, maybe the warmest, friendliest people in the world, that certainly that I've ever met. And this effort to risk your life to save culture, certainly the opposite of of these negative stereotypes.
It's so true. And that is something I love too about working with Afghan people. They're so gracious, and
So,
even
yeah.
in the hardest times, they are kind and caring, and it makes it all the harder when you can't help. So I'm glad that you've been successful in helping all the people that you saw working so hard, who, they're not the mining executives making billions, and yet they're the ones facing the clearest threat. So
Yeah.
it's incredible. Well, I want to hear before we close about your new project. How you heard it's in Yemen, right? How did you hear about this particular, new project, and what's going on there?
Yeah. So, and actually, two Yemen shorts are playing at the Archeos Film
Oh,
Festival as
cool.
well. So, yeah, one from a city called Taz and one from a city called Damar are playing in this film festival. But I'm working on a feature-length documentary from Yemen, and I think to take a step back, I sometimes say there's a dysfunction in my brain that I'm attracted to human rights stories, but stories that are difficult. Again, there's like a dysfunction in me, I think. But like
I
if
have
I
that too.
hear, yeah, like the Mes Aynak thing, it's like there are these people that are trying to do this amazing thing. They're sort of being oppressed. There's this human rights story, but you can never access the site. You can never get there. No one will ever talk to you. Something in my brain is like, that's the next project. That's the next
You
project,
have it
or
worse than I do, clearly.
yeah, or like that no one can tell us that, right? No one can say like, look, cover this story because it's easy, but not this. Don't cover this one because it's too hard,
Mm-hmm.
right? And Yemen is very much like that. Like I began filming last year, and just the visa process alone took a year just to get the kind of first step of permission. And Yemen is a very complicated place, essentially, divided by a civil war of sorts. But Yemen has, like Afghanistan, has all these kind of negative stereotypes around it in the West, but has, some of the most incredible world heritage in the world. From there's five UNESCO World Heritage sites in this relatively small country. Some of the oldest Arabic writing, the birthplace of the Queen of Sheba, and that legacy, the birthplace of coffee, mud brick skyscrapers, all this incredible stuff. Um, I always felt really bad. So in Mes Aynak, it's a very male film, and sometimes people would ask me like, "Where are the women in the film?" And unfortunately, it's partly cultural, but the Afghan archaeologists, you mentioned there was one woman from the Ministry of Mines that was on site, but it was a it was a male kind of dominated industry, honestly. And culturally, for me to interview women, it's not appropriate in Afghanistan. So I really wanted in this new film to focus on women. So this new Yemen documentary is looking at women archaeologists and heritage workers trying to save heritage in a country during active war, and we see active bombing in the news now all the time in Yemen. So yeah, that's the new project in a similar vein to Saving May Sinai in a lot of ways. I haven't tired of this this. I guess that's another thing I learned is I think this work to save heritage is important, and something I love to continue.
Well, and I mean, I imagine it would be just amazing to see these things firsthand and to get to watch people. I grew up wanting so badly to be an archaeologist, that I thought it would be the coolest thing in the world. And you get to watch that and see it in real time. And, maybe one day someone will see those artifacts behind glass in a museum, but it can't be remotely the same as what the view you get.
Right, yeah, exactly. Someday someone will probably see it behind glass, but now it's like sitting in the dirt, like being unprotected. Yeah, like and I think there's also this process of, you know, in the West, the stereotype of Yemen is also like it's a dangerous place. It's full of terrorists or something. Like it's these really shallow negative stereotypes. Not that, there is some of the most incredible, like Afghanistan, incredible world heritage that exists, and some of that is hopefully showing people, another a true side to the to the country to break those stereotypes. So they might be seeing something in the film maybe and being like, oh my God, that's so incredible. Maybe like your significant other sort of said, like I had no idea, like on so many levels, that this was, Afghanistan in that film is a Buddhist country, and there's so many things that are like none of this fits into the stereotypes that people have. And Yemen is that way too. It's it's mummies and temples and ancient writing and just all of these incredible things, that probably no one associates with the country.
I think that's amazing though, because especially at a time when we're fighting so much about the current state of things, being able to bring it
Yeah.
back and say, hey, you think that this is what you were, like look at how much you've changed over this time. Like let's come together. Here's a reminder that everything is changing, and we can either go to war over those changes, or we can just embrace the commonalities that we have. And I don't know, I think there's so much value in remembering our past, our united past right now, and trying to,
Absolutely.
there's just so much conflict and so much, yeah. I'm really excited to see whatever is coming next from you, because I am sure that it's going to be amazing. When do you expect that Yemen documentary is going to make its way out?
That's a good question. So again, like little vignettes are playing at the Archeos Film
Okay.
Festival that actually started on, I think it's this week. So you could see those little vignettes if you like. But the feature length documentary probably next year at the earliest.
Great. That's very exciting. And I'm going to, in the show notes, link to the Archeos, like the whole, there's a film festival website, and you can actually get free access to several documentaries, including Saving Mes Aynak, and I'm sure some of those other smaller. I'm gonna have to now look and see if I can find those vignettes to watch for free. But people can also watch your documentary on, I think it's Amazon Prime, correct? And where else can they
Yeah.
find it, Brent?
Yeah, it was on Netflix for about 3 years. Sadly, it's not on Netflix anymore. But yeah, Amazon, Vimeo
Okay.
has a link. There's If you visit the savingmasonic.com website, there's a whole bunch of ways to see the streaming version, and of course you can see it for free at Archeos now if you wanted. And a DVD is for sale as well if you're were interested from the website too.
Cool. I'll make sure all of that is linked here so people can support in whatever way, and to all your social media so that they can keep following you and seeing what devastating topic you cover next. That's what I always feel like. I'm like, oh gosh, I just go for what's the most horrifying thing going on right now. Let me tell you about it. I must be really fun at parties. Um,
Yeah, me too. I'm no fun, but there is some hope. So I do think both stories. It's not all bad news. There is some there is some hope, and then I think I'm a little bit of I think the most pessimistic people honestly are the most hopeful deep down. The pessimism is like a protection,
it's a
so I think
veneer.
yeah, deep down it's just like to protect yourself. It's like you're the most vulnerable, right?
Yeah.
So I do think deep down there is this hope, and I get so much too from the hope of the Afghan archaeologists and the hope of the Yemeni people. I think there is a lot of hope and beauty. It's just there's a lot of threat too, unfortunately. But I do hope that I hope the hope and beauty shines through.
I know that they do in Saving Mes Aynak, and I will be looking for it in the Yemeni documentaries too. I'm really excited about that. I thank you so much for coming and talking about these things and the behind the scenes kind of and the updates. It's been really, I've learned a lot, and I'm sure that everyone who's watching is going to be learning a lot and hopefully watching the documentary too and speaking out. In addition to speaking out for Afghan women and the Afghan people, speaking out for Afghan culture so that it doesn't get lost. So thank you so much, Brent.
Yes, thank you so much for having me and for keeping this conversation alive. It's been really wonderful. Thank you.
Well, I just want to close by giving the standard call out for thanking everybody for listening, for supporting the people of Afghanistan. And as always, if you've enjoyed the episode, make sure you're following the YouTube page and enabling notifications. And for now, Tasha Kaur, and hope to see you again soon.